All right, behind me I have two vehicles, a 24 Tacoma and a 24 Ranger Raptor. And this will kind of be an opportunity to give you guys about 1 year, our thoughts. We've got mileage on this, we've got mileage on that, we've done a bunch of upgrades, accessories. What are the pros and cons? Where does this truck shine? Where does this truck shine? It's not going to be a you should buy this video. It's if you're going to compare the two of these trucks, what are the pros and cons of both? And when both of these kind of were released at the same time, there was a lot of comparison over social media and YouTube about, like, you know, a lot of other people compared these two trucks to each other. And I was a little surprised to see, I figured that, like, let's be honest, like, Toyota guys are hardcore fanboys. And I don't think that this truck was nearly as well received as I thought it was going to be. And to contrast that, like, there really is no cult following for a Ranger. So, you know, I looked at the Ranger Raptor and said, hey, on paper, this truck's going to be awesome. So I guess the point of this video is pros and cons of both, what I like about both, what I don't like about both, and just kind of give an overview of that. So obviously, when we get vehicles, it's to do R&D. We're going to build portals for them. Maybe we build a steering rack like we did for this. And so comparing, like, our product on the two platforms, Toyota's better for a bunch of reasons. One of the things that I really like about the Tacoma is the stance on this. When you put it on portals, it's not crazy wide. We actually only add 2.7 inches per side on width on a 24 Tacoma, where we're adding 3.5 inches a side on the Ranger Raptor. Now, I shot a wheel video that I think it was, I don't know, a year and a half ago, before both of these trucks came out. And I talked about positive offset wheels, why you want them, and why the OEMs are going to transition this direction. Well, after that video airs, you get these two trucks, and the factory wheels that come on these trucks are plus 55 and plus 60 from the factory, which is one of the reasons why, you know, I'm friends with the guys at Method Race Wheels. Their number one growing wheel is their plus 35 line, because if you're going to take a 24 Tacoma, you're not putting a zero offset wheel on that thing. You're going to probably run a plus 35 method. And I think other wheel companies are starting to move that direction. So on both of these trucks, we have our collaboration with Method. It's a plus 45 17x9 forged bead lock. Sorry, bead grip, not bead lock. This vehicle here has fender flares from Bushwhacker, I think? No, Rough Country. So it's like a $350 fender flare set that takes the factory fenders, replaces them with the TRD Pro. And the TRD Pro is not really any different other than it has less offset on the wheel and it runs a wider fender. So I throw these fenders on, I throw portals on. We still have a little bit of poke, but the overall stance on this thing, it looks like it could be from the factory, just a lot beefier. The Ranger. So, this is painful. One of the things that I cannot stand about the Ranger, and I know that there were conversations about this at Ford when the Ranger 2-3 years ago, Ford had a Ranger Raptor that they raced in Baja, and it was a right-hand drive vehicle. And there was a lot of discussion about the fender wells. So this truck comes on a 33-inch tire. It's a Ford Performance vehicle on a 33. By now, OEMs should know that we all want bigger tires. you can't fit bigger than a 315/70/17 on this without having to cut fenders. I'm running a 37. Yes, I had to trim some sheet metal, still running factory flares. We were able to kind of trim them, push them back, glue them into place. It's not the best option. I fit 38s on this thing. It's currently on 37s, minimal trimming. It was much easier to fit a bigger tire, and across the board, guys are putting like a 1-inch lift on these and throwing 35s on them, and it fits. You're not putting a 35 on this without cutting sheet metal. That sucks. Aftermarket support is going to be way better on the Tacoma, and a prime example of that is I want to put lights on it. I just went and bought Baja Design's light kit. So you've got a pair of S2s, you've got an S1 in the grill. That's stuff that you can just go online, click, and you're done. I don't have fog lights on this because I'm having to develop my own kit to be able to put an S1 in it. I had to make my own light bar to put lights on the front. I just don't see a lot of people jumping into aftermarket on the Ranger Raptor at this time, because they're also not going to build a ton of these trucks. So aftermarket support on Toyota is always going to be better than on the Ranger, and whether it's Ranger or Ranger Raptor, they just build more of these. I don't know, moving back. So, it's worth talking about steering on these. This is kind of I think one of the biggest differences between these two trucks. This is a Ford Performance product, and they did not give you a Ford Performance steering rack. The steering rack that comes in this Ranger Raptor, it sucks. Tiny tie rods, not much power. I don't even think it's great for 33s. You step up to a 37, I had to change the whole rack in this thing. Yeah, that's great that now we have a product where we make a full replacement billet steering rack for the Ranger Raptor. It's still not as good as the stock one from Toyota. Ben from Descent Off-Road is running a Land Cruiser 250 on 40s with our portals. And Ben and I have had a bunch of conversations about steering because that was a concern for me. You're not putting 40s on the Bronco steering rack and not have it stall out. He turns 40s on the stock Tacoma rack. He wheels that thing almost every weekend. We don't plan on making a steering rack for the Toyota because it seems to be good enough. You know, in time you'll find out whether racks are breaking. We all know that Bronco and the rack that's in the Bronco is very similar to Ranger Raptor. They break racks. This one doesn't really seem to. It's still really early on in the product life cycle, so we'll see what happens there. I guess if we move back, well, we'll talk about engines. So Toyota has been known, like I had a Gen 3 Tacoma. That motor, it's pretty much like given that that thing's going to go 250,000 miles. The new 4-cylinder in this, there's speculation, but here's what I think you can make like an honest, educated speculation on the two engines, okay? So 3-liter twin-turbo V6. It's been around for 5, 6, 7 years. It's been in a bunch of platforms. It's a badass motor. I absolutely love the 3.0 in this. What is it, 2.4 4-cylinder? It's a turbo. And anytime you put a turbo on a gas motor, if you're not doing a full build where you're doing like a forged bottom end, H-beam rods, an aftermarket crank, like you're asking a lot of this. So I think my speculation, and time will tell, the days of the 250,000 mile Tacoma are kind of done. I just don't see you getting, you either make power or you get longevity. I don't think anybody is going to argue that like this motor isn't fun. They're also not going to argue that this motor is going to last 250,000 miles. So where Toyota had a huge edge, which is, oh, they're reliable. The old Toyotas might have had 4 or 5 computer systems in it. I don't want to get this wrong. It was like 46 computers now. I don't know, maybe somebody knows and can correct me in the comments. This thing is electronics everywhere. So is this, but it's like such a jump from the old, simple, reliable Toyotas to the new ones. I'm not saying this isn't going to be reliable. I'm just saying that this is super complicated. And so I think that that might be a pain point that Toyota owners are going to have in the future. One comment on this. So a lot of guys online are like, solid axle swap it. And they'll say this about everything. So, oh, you should solid axle swap a Bronco. Oh, you can solid axle swap a new Tacoma. No, you can't. And those days of solid axle swapping any of these vehicles have come to a close. And the main reason for that is the steering system is integrated into ABS. And so if you decide to take the steering rack out and you wanted to fabricate and put a box in this thing, good luck, dude. Nothing on this truck is going to work. And with everything moving computer controlled, so both of these have electric assist steering racks. You're not taking the rack out, putting a steering box in, and having anything in the truck work. The whole dash will be a Christmas tree. I know there was a guy that solid axle swapped a Bronco, and he says it works. And I challenged him to show me a photo of the dash. It won't. When Ford eliminated ABS out of the Bronco in the race cars, I was there. And it took, I think it was 4 engineers from Ford, 2 days, and like phone calls in to be able to eliminate ABS. The average guy like us, that's not happening. And so you're kind of stuck with what they end up giving you. You're not upgrading steering racks. Our steering rack that we make for the Ranger Raptor is just a Ford steering rack put into a better housing, swapped in. We're not changing electronics because we're just locked out of the systems. And that's just going to be the trend. A big win on the Bronco. On the Ranger Raptor, they give you a front locker. Now, where that front locker is, I literally had to go on YouTube and look up, how do I turn on a locker in the Ranger Raptor? Because it's like buried in the touch screen. I don't know why they do it. Toyota gets a win, sort of, on the rear locker at least, because it's a push button. That's awesome. Why does Toyota not give us in the US a front locker? And I know that, everyone was talking about that online of, oh man, they missed the mark again. They do not give you an option. Even on the TRD Pro, you can't get a front locker. The reason for that, it's kind of an interesting story, is when Toyota decides whether they're going to give you a front locker or not, it's a function of what percentage of the roads in that country are paved versus unpaved. I shit you not. And if it's like above a certain percentage, then they automatically offer the option of a front locker. So like in Australia, Africa, Middle East, South America, you can buy a Toyota and have an optional front locker. They don't give it to us in the US. Big miss, but you can add an ARB if you want, I think. I haven't gone that route. Interiors. I think they're both they're okay. The Raptor definitely takes the cake on that because, the back seat in the Tacoma. So the Tacoma is a longer truck, bigger truck, longer wheelbase, less room in the cab. And it's significantly less room. Like, I should probably pull a tape measure on this, and maybe we'll throw it in B-roll or something after. But I'll do road trips on this. I mean, this thing has 20,000 miles on it. This has 5,000 miles. You can kind of figure out which one gets driven more. I could not take a road trip in this truck with my 10-year-old and 13-year-old. You can, I don't want to say comfortably put an adult in the back seat of this, but you can. There's no way that you're putting an adult in the back seat of a new Tacoma. And you get the TRD Pro, like, bro, they've got 4 or 5 inches less room because of the bitchin' shocks that they put in the back seat. So, kind of a loss on interior cab room for the Tacoma. I would go Ranger all the way. I don't think we talked about transmissions. I talked about motors. Motors way better in the Ranger Raptor. I don't hate the 4-cylinder, but it sounds like a diesel. It clacks. And 8-speed transmission versus 10-speed. The Tacoma comes with a ZF transmission, which I know have had some issues. I have nothing wrong with this. I think an 8-speed or a 10-speed, it doesn't really make that big of a difference. If I had to pick between the two, I would take the 10-speed in the Ford. The 8-speed ZF is proven. That's what Jeep has been running for years. What else am I missing? Oh, one thing about the bed, if you're gonna take these two, if you're gonna take one of these off-road, the breakover on the Tacoma, the way that they did the rear bumper, and this comes down to aftermarket support, you have way less sheet metal hanging behind the rear tire. I freak out that I'm gonna smash the bed on this thing, so I don't really take it into that many rocks. Aftermarket support, man, there's already a half dozen companies that make good armor for this. Not many on this side. So breakover angle on the rear on the Tacoma is awesome. But with that being said, the exhaust on the Tacoma, dude, like big miss. I think there's 6 inches between the frame and and where the exhaust comes out. God, I'm choking. So I've already smashed the exhaust. Actually, Christian smashed the exhaust on this. But the exhaust on the Tacoma is a problem. You're going to end up cutting that off. But you're going to have lots of options because aftermarket support. It is cool. Thankfully, MagnaFlow makes exhaust for the Ranger, and it's badass. I haven't done exhaust on this. I don't know, because it smashed and because I don't really drive the truck. Because I drive this. And, oh, it's worth mentioning rear axles. So I don't actually know what's in the Ranger other than it's a dropout style third member because of the Watts link on this. I guess, well, we should talk about suspension. The Tacoma from Toyota, TRD off-road, has probably one of the worst shocks I think I've ever experienced on a trim level like this. The shocks on this are amazing. The shocks on this suck. I have Fox 3.0s on this now, and it's better. And the 3.0s on this are still not as good as the 2.5s that come from the factory on the Ranger Raptor. So, suspension-wise, thankfully, they did a big update on the new Tacoma, and the geometry on the front end is a lot better than the old stuff where you would run like a 600 or 650 pound spring because the motion ratio sucked. It's definitely better on this. Rear suspension between the two. I don't know why OEMs do this. The Bronco is the same way. They mount the panhard bar on the axle side of the rear suspension. The panhard bar is mounted at center line of the rear axle or below center line. This ends up affecting your roll axis, and like the easiest way to explain it is it drives like shit. What happens is when you go around a corner, the vehicle wants to pivot around that low point, so it's really easy for it to climb over that low point, and it makes the ass end of the vehicle feel like it's stepping out. Now, on a longer wheelbase like this, I want to say this was 132 versus 128. It's not as bad on longer wheelbase, but rear suspension, 1,000%. Like the Watts link on the Ranger Raptor makes the truck sit level and planted through turns. You can drive this thing 50% harder than you can drive this just because of the suspension characteristics. Huge win for Ranger Raptor on rear suspension. The Tacoma's not horrible. And I think part of that is because it's a longer wheelbase. But panhard bars just suck in general, because what you end up having is the front suspension with an A-arm moves straight up and down. When you put a panhard bar in the rear, and that's that fifth link, so you have two straight lowers, two straight uppers, and then a diagonal connector to keep the axle from like falling out of the vehicle, I guess. The panhard bar travels on an arc. So as the suspension cycles, it does not cycle straight up and down. So a Watts link, the front suspension, independent, moves straight up and down. The rear suspension on the Ranger Raptor with a Watts link moves straight up and down. So when you're hitting bumps, the whole suspension is going straight up and down. When you hit bumps on the Tacoma or a Bronco, the front suspension goes straight up and down, and the rear suspension swings side to side as it travels. And what ends up happening is it feels like the ass end is dancing side to side. I get that OEMs don't put a triangulated four-link in because it's hard to fit around a gas tank, but huge win on this. I hate panhard bars, track bars, whatever you want to call them. I'm just not a fan of this style rear suspension. It's a lot worse on the Bronco than it is on the Tacoma, but it's a noticeable thing that I am just not a big fan of. I don't know. Overall, I would, well, pricing. Let's talk about pricing. I don't know currently where this stuff sits. I do know that I paid $52,000 for this. I paid $57,000 for this. And this kind of goes down to trim levels too. So when you buy a Ranger Raptor, I think you can only add like 2 or 3 things. Like you can get a graphics package. I didn't want that. There are so many trim levels to the Tacoma. I didn't realize that I screwed up when I bought this thing. I just figured, hey, I want the TRD off-road. And I get in it, and it's got the small screen, and like I'm talking to other friends, and they're like, oh, you know, it's kind of cool how the tailgate lifts on its own. And I'm like, well, mine doesn't do that. So there's so many different trim packages on the new Toyota stuff that if you're going to get one of these trucks, man, you got to read the fine print and like really go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and that's my fault. I didn't do that. So I bought the TRD off-road. I paid $52. Then if you're putting shocks on it, that's another $5,200. So this truck with this shock package on costs the same as this truck with this shock package on. I think you get a lot more truck for the money out of the Ranger Raptor. And the fact that they're getting $65,000 for the TRD Pro, which the TRD Pro comes with Fox shocks. They're not even remotely as good as the live valve setup that you get with a Ranger Raptor. It's just, yes, they both have 2.5-inch Fox shocks on them, and every Fox shock that I've seen from the factory, with the exception of live valve, is way too soft. So you're going to be probably upgrading them anyways. But again, aftermarket support, you've got Icon, Fox, King, you've got a lot of options here. You're not going to change anything on this, because if you change the shock, you're going to get codes on the dash. You lose all of your drive modes. You lose all of your steering modes. The only thing you retain is your exhaust mode, because, again, everything's computer integrated, and this has live valve. But if you change live valve, or if you take a truck that has live valve and you take the shock off and you put an aftermarket one on, I don't know what you're doing, because it's so good from the factory. It's so terrible from the factory, but you can make it better. Big win on suspension here. I guess I probably should have been like check boxes of who wins what category. But I don't think that really matters as much. Like, at the end of the day, if you're considering these two, I would take the Ranger Raptor over the Tacoma in a heartbeat. And I'm not a Tacoma hater, and I'm not a Ford fanboy. I just like fun vehicles. You know, I've said this before, like, I love my Jeep 392. My tow rig is a Ram. I loved my 23 Tacoma, even though it was slow. The Bronco's a great all-around vehicle. Like, I just am a fan of any OEM that wants to make a cool enthusiast platform. I'll get behind it if it's good. So, you know, if you're looking at these two, overall, I would say the Ranger Raptor is a whole lot more truck for the money. But if you're going to buy the Tacoma, and this is not a hybrid. I've driven the hybrids. I think they're better. It's still not even close to the 3-liter that they put in this. And so if you're comparing apples to apples, if you trimmed this up with like the Gucci screen and stuff and leather interior, you're going to be at 60. This one's at 57. Kind of a no-brainer. But, you know, the Tacoma's going to sell more trucks, and it's going to have better support, and aftermarket will kind of determine a lot of that, and time will tell. So, you know, 1 year impression, where we're at, Ranger. But disagree, go for it. Have questions on them, I'd love to answer them, and throw that stuff in the comments. We'll see you on the next one. Okay, I did forget one thing, and this one blew my mind. So the rear driveline on the Ranger Raptor is a 2-piece steel with a carrier bearing. It's pretty beefy. I've had no issues with it. And honestly, if you run portals, it pulls your drive shaft up 3.9 inches, so you're not hitting that shit anyways. But the Tacoma, this is crazy. So the 24, all the new Tacomas come with a 75-inch diameter, aluminum, 4 thou thick drive shaft. So not really, but like, it's a monster, I don't know, 4-inch diameter probably, aluminum, probably O2 thin wall, but the driveline is super long. So I got the truck up on a lift initially and went, cool, that drive shaft has to go. So I called Jim at JE Reel and said, hey, Jim, like, are you making anything for this? And he goes, no, but take some photos and send them to me. So I send him photos, and his response is, you're on your own, bud. It's basically so long that Toyota had to go large diameter, 1 piece. and there's nowhere to put a carrier bearing. So when you get a really long drive shaft, the reason they do them out of aluminum is because when you get that spinning mass, it wants to like jump rope. So they'll do thin and large diameter, and then the drive shaft is fine. If you hit this drive shaft on a rock anywhere, and I'm a little surprised nobody in the industry's talked about this. You hit that drive shaft on a rock, it is going to twist and taco, and you're screwed. And so the only way to put a steel drive line in this, because it's so long, is to put a carrier bearing and make a two-piece drive line. Well, there's nowhere to put a carrier bearing short of like custom fabbing something, and I didn't really want to do that. And so, yes, this truck has been wheeled quite a bit, and you can see from the scratches and stuff, but we haven't hit the drive line yet, probably because it's on portals. But I think my prediction, you're going to start seeing people with Tacomas start to wheel them, and the rear drive line is going to be a major problem. Somebody, I would assume, is going to come up with a solution. It ain't going to be me, but hopefully somebody in the driveline world wants to tackle this. But the rear driveline on this is like one of those you got to be kidding me moments. So somebody figure that out, because that's a big problem, just not one we're going to solve. I think that's it. I definitely forgot about that one. Oh, no, I forgot one other thing. We didn't talk about the winch, or lack thereof. Okay, so I'm going to put a rear winch where my spare tire used to be in this vehicle, because like every new Ford, they pack 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag and give you nowhere to put a winch on this thing. Big win for Toyota. You still have a ton of room. And aftermarket support, like I don't have one on there, but I mean, how many companies make front bumpers that look factory but are steel, that integrate a winch? Yeah, you can easily put a winch up front here. You're not doing it here. So I'm going to do a rear mounted winch, and if I have to, I can still pull forward. But definitely big, thumbs up on Tacoma for giving room behind the grill to actually put a winch.
As you hit that and hear the plastic.
Yeah, well, oh, dude, I get on tangents all the time, bro. Do you know why all of the new Toyotas, they're like, and they're getting softer, and then they don't put toe points on the front anymore. And the reason for that, you can see how it flexes. I shit you not, I had this conversation at Toyota when I was up at TRD. They're trying to make the front ends of these vehicles soft, so when you hit pedestrians, they don't get impaled or crushed. They're literally trying to soften. That's nice, right? They're making the front end of these things soft and out of plastic, and not putting toe points, because that toe point can like crush a pedestrian's leg. I guess that's what happens when lawyers take over the world. But at least you can change it out. Well, yeah. Yeah, but the Ranger Raptor comes with a steel front bumper-ish. I mean, that's plastic, but this whole section here rattles. At least it's steel.
You probably didn't do that before you owned it, though.
Well, I don't know. But yeah, they're making the front of vehicles soft so that when you hit people with them, there's a less likely chance that they will get injured. So replace this with a metal bumper from a bunch of different companies, and you fix that problem. And then you can run over pedestrians, which I don't recommend, but hey, you can put a winch in there. I think that's it. Oh, no, I didn't even mention that both are on 37s. Both trucks are on 37s. There you go. All right.